controversial, disapproval, public disagreement. Part 2. Internet, welcome to the second half of who I believe are the top 10 most controversial Survivor winners, where we cover the top 5, and along the way, we'll be listing a few honorable mentions. My name is Peridiam, and if you haven't seen the first half, check it out. It kind of sets the stage for this part, but otherwise, let's get on with the list. Number 5. I feel comfortable with these 5 winners being this high, but the order has given me pause. After much deliberation, ultimately I have settled on the 5th most controversial winner being from season 32. Co-wrong. It's Michele Fitzgerald. I know some fans might say she could even be number 1, but we'll get to that aspect later with a future entry. Michele won this season against Aubrey and Ty, 2 other formidable players who both played Survivor for a combined 5 times now, although this was all 3's first time out. None of these 3 players performed as well as their first time, which I think might ease some of the modern pushback Michele receives, though her win is still contested from time to time. The biggest point of contention with Michele is that she beat Aubrey, a player who encapsulated the underdog narrative arc from the very beginning. Aubrey was this quirky fish out of water Survivor fan who found herself struggling with the elements very early on and slowly found her footing as the season progressed, culminating in her taking over the game and eventually calling the shots each episode. From where she was panicking over the heat in the pre-merge and scratching out names on the voting parchment, Aubrey became a tour de force to where she orchestrated the biggest slip of the season when Ty joined her against Jason and Scott. She was in a prime spot to win by the last few episodes. And then everything came undone. Her next closest ally, Joe, was medevaced at the final 5, and Michele ended up winning the last few challenges of the season to clinch her spot at the final tribal. Aubrey lost control, and there really wasn't much that she could do except pitch her case to a rather sour jury who were largely taken out by her hand. Aubrey lost to Michele, and the fanbase was floored, confused, all the usual traits of a good old-fashioned blindside. Aubrey losing to Michele was the latest controversy that rocked the Survivor community for a little while. It brought up old memories of past winners who found themselves in the same spot as either of these 2 women. Just look at Sandra in Heroes vs. Villains. In the case of Co-Wrong, most fans were either in one camp or the other, Sandra or Parvati, Michele or Aubrey. Michele spoke about this too in her second appearance on Winners at War, where she doubted the legitimacy of her win. Self-doubt is a common side effect, especially with the internet in play, where you're flooded with messages about your own self-worth on a constant basis. Heck, I've gone back to old school players from over 30 seasons ago and looked at their profiles, and they are still getting hate messages sent their way. And all of this begs the question, yeah, you can win, but can the jury also get it wrong? I would argue, outside of them accidentally voting for an unintended party, they can't. By design, the jury is not wrong. It's them who gets to ultimately decide who is the most deserving. Not to say other players aren't deserving. It's how the game has been designed from the very beginning. It's the name of the game, no matter how much the fans disagree with their decision, which to me has always touched upon the fact that watching Survivor and playing Survivor are 2 very, very different things. The game itself doesn't happen in the editing suite, but that's what we get to see, which drastically distorts our perception of their reality. Michele had a similar arc to Erica from season 41, where she never went to tribal pre-merge, and then at the merge found herself weaving in and out of the majority alliance. At times due to her own agency, other times less so, she ultimately won out by the end and was underestimated by her competitors. But between the jury being a group of fairly dislikable people to them valuing Michele's underdog status over Aubrey's growth arc, a lot of the fans weren't happy and put into question whether Michele really deserved it in the end. And thus, this cycle continues.
So Michele, I think that the first half of the game, you got really lucky. Not going to a tribal council for 22 days, you just got to slide through without strategizing. So when you voted me out, your tightest alliance, I was proud of you because I think that that was your biggest move, and for me, that was your turning point in the game.
So for me, maybe it looked like, yeah, I was dragged or whatever, but when I figured it out, I think I was able to excel in it. And those decisions were well thought out for myself and for you, until, unfortunately, I had to vote you out.
People were a bit surprised by my win when I was up against people who played bigger, flashier games than me.
The winner of Survivor,
My first time, I really struggled with, like, some of the backlash that I got.
For what?
Well, my win was super controversial.
Let me tell you something. If you win, you win.
Yeah.
The end.
Number 4. Should I drop the bomb? Let's drop the bomb. Number 4 is Ben from season 35, Heroes vs. Healers vs. Hustlers. Surprisingly, I did not have Ben higher for one major reason. I think there are a lot of fans out there who were happy to see Ben win. A lot of people were rooting for Ben, potentially even more than there were rooting for Chrissy, Devin, or Ryan. Consider that Ben was a Marine, which factored heavily into his story. He was both a leader, played the spy role in his alliance, sneaking around behind enemy lines, found 3 idols, was an underdog from the final 7 onward, and was more than willing to make a scene and blow up the game if need be. Yeah, I could see why the producers leaned into his win. The entire reunion show is just the Ben show. And yet, despite all that, Ben is without a doubt one of the most controversial winners in Survivor, not so much because his gameplay was lacking or he was outmatched by his fellow finalists, but because of the legitimacy of him being eligible for the win in the first place. Outside of maybe the super idol in season 13 Cook Islands with Yule being overpowered, or some hushed behind the scenes whispers and lawsuits in Borneo, Ben's win put into question the format and the production of the show itself. Normally when controversy arises over a winner, as we've seen thus far, it's about whether the winner outplayed the other finalists. In Ben's case, it's not about if he outplayed Chrissy or Ryan so much as it was about if he should have ever been at the final tribal. To give some context, for 34 seasons there was a vote held at the final 4, and the way to survive said vote was to either win immunity or get the votes to stay. Or if you tie the vote, you just win the fire-making tiebreaker. But then a never-before-seen twist was introduced at the final 4 where there was no longer going to be a vote. Instead, the immunity winner would pick one player to automatically take to the final 3, and the other 2 players would duel in a fire-making challenge for that 3rd spot. In other words, Ben had yet another way to survive despite being outnumbered and beaten at the immunity challenge. Ben never won individual immunity all season. Instead, he found 3 idols, first at the final 9, then the final 6, and then 5. And many fans were skeptical of his idol-finding prowess. We've certainly seen players like Russell Hantz find idols quickly, but never in such quick succession to this degree. As many fans speculated online, what were the odds Ben would be able to pull this off, especially when none of the idols were hidden in particularly difficult places. But then Ben loses the final challenge, and for 34 seasons, if you fail to win the final challenge and you're outnumbered, tough luck. Better luck next time. But now a new twist is introduced out of the blue that radically changes the end of this season. Big targets have yet another round to escape after the final 3 was introduced in season 13 from the final 2 to allow the same players to avoid elimination at that final 3. One less round, they can be voted out. The final 4 fire-making challenge does the same thing, disguised as a thematic hurdle about fire representing life. So yeah, when we're talking about most controversial winners, with all of this in mind, Ben did go on to win the fire-making challenge fair and square, earning his spot in the final 3 alongside Chrissy and Ryan. Devin was eliminated, and Ben's underdog narrative against the odds was too compelling for a majority of the jury to pass up. He won. But at the same time, a lot of fans were disappointed with how he got there. As many would say, a last-minute format overhaul was suspect at worst, cheap at best. Many of those who were fans of Ben Online would admit that it was an odd decision, like a Deus Ex Machina, dampening what would have been an otherwise fantastic narrative for his 4th place Fallen Angel finish. And while I do believe and have gone on record to say that Ben is absolutely underrated as a player and a winner, and up to the final 7 he actually played pretty well, it stands to reason that his win was a marked shift in the conversation of questioning a winner's deservedness in the eyes of the fan base.
Tonight, you are in charge and will cast the only vote. You will choose one person to sit.
This is a huge twist in the game, and it means that the door is open for Ben to potentially come to the final 3. Not good.
Ben, you had more shots on goal than anybody, and you could not close the deal.
An upside down you will forever haunt me. Being in the Marines, I've been through a lot of battles in life, and tonight is gonna be a battle. My game's been about providing for my family more than anything else. And at the end of the day, I need to bring a paycheck home to my wife and my 2 kids.
Number 3. Whew, there's a lot to talk about. And this next one is likely the biggest blindside of this entire list. The 3rd most controversial Survivor winner is from Season 6, The Amazon, and it's Jenna Morasca. Most fans today don't have a lot to say about Jenna because her win was so long ago. But at the time, Jenna was the first winner to have most of the fan base against her. Whereas Rich and Tina had split the fan base at the time of their wins, by the time Season 6 rolled around, the game was afoot, and strategy was recognized to be the name of the game. For the most part. It wasn't so much about morals. And as we saw that season, Rob Cesternino sliced and diced like nobody had ever seen. A pioneer of the strategic game and managing multiple alliances at once, picking up the underdogs and using them for a round or two to advance his own game, Rob finessed that cast like they were putty in his hand. Probst once said he was the greatest player to never win. But guess who beat him and gave him that title? And more than that, even Rob's protege, Matt, Machete Matt, Crazy Matt, the guy who was kind of like an alien and nobody could really relate to him at all, even the fan base believed he deserved to win the game more than Jenna. Bear in mind, Jenna had the biggest blowout of a vote through the first 6 seasons. She won 4 immunities. Objectively, on paper, she could be statistically the best winner at that point. But that was far from the case in the fan base, as many fans were shocked when the final vote came in and it was revealed that she won. For context, Jenna's edit on the season wasn't great. The editors often showed her less than savory moments. I've heard rumors that it was to combat spoilers, to throw fans off the scent that she would win. Jenna was depicted as bratty, entitled. She cried and pouted when she was blindsided. She wanted to quit the game after getting sick. She did have a sad story relating to her mother having cancer, but by and large, her narrative was angled as the evil stepsister to Christy, the deaf woman, who was shown to be an underdog in the women's tribe in the first episode. Christy had more fans than Jenna, and so when Christy was ousted at the final 6, and then you've got Rob being a mastermind and Matt being this character who's coming around on the strategy, and then you've got Jenna, who's more of a villain, or dare I say anti-hero in the story. The fan base is gonna react how they're gonna react when the last vote is read. Jenna's win wasn't so much a case that Matt absolutely deserved it, but just that Jenna didn't. The vitriol against her was enough to rule her out as a deserving winner, regardless of who she was up against. Likeability goes a long way in the eye of the public, and being the first winner to not be respected for their gameplay or liked for their personality culminated in her being very controversial. I even asked several old school fans and lore masters who they would say were the most controversial winners, and Jenna was one of the first few names that popped up. And so, after all this, she's number 3.
21, the youngest survivor. I felt like I've worked really hard to get here, and it's an honor. And this is the biggest accomplishment in this game and in my life, and I don't think it's sunk in yet.
Both of them claim to be honest players who played this game with integrity. It's who did the best job to outwit, outplay, and outlast. Is it Jenna or is it Matt? I wish there was a choice C, none of the above, but there isn't.
The winner of Survivor, Amazon.
Before I get to my top 2, I want to list a few honorable mentions. From Season 4, Marquesas, we have Vesepia, a player who was under the radar, not terribly exciting, but she beat Nalia, not Kathy, who many fans were thinking should win. So I would argue that her win wasn't as debatable. From Season 17, Gabon, we have Bob, who was a likable underdog with little gameplay to his name. He nearly lost to Susie by 1 vote, and then you have Sugar in the equation, who was shown to run the post-merge. At the end of Gabon, you'll often hear a couple of questions. 1, how did Susie get 3 votes? And 2, how did Sugar not get a vote? And then we have Fabio from Season 21, Nicaragua, who won in a close 5-4 vote over Chase, but 2 of his votes were from players who quit the game and debatably shouldn't have been on the jury in the first place. Had they not been, he likely would lose. And lastly, y'all ready for this? Blindside time. As an honorable mention, I've got Mike Gabler from Survivor 43. Yup, I saw some of your predictions in part 1. Y'all got Gablered. I know many will be surprised he's not in my top 10 or 11, but I do have him as an honorable mention, which means he's likely in my top 15. I decided not to include him for 2 reasons. First, recency bias is a hell of a force. And second, I am genuinely not sure that he's worthy of being in this top 11. I considered having him above Erica, who is at the bottom of the list, finalist, but I just don't feel like the pushback he got was as strong as it was for her. I'll personally attest that from my perspective, predominantly on YouTube at least, Erica got a lot of flack, be it due to her weak edit, Xander's underdog story, or the dreaded hourglass of it all. If nothing else, I probably just need a little bit more distance from his win to put him here, but yeah, for now, I think he's in my top 15. But now, number 2 and number 1. When I asked months ago who you all thought were the most controversial winners, 2 names kept popping up. When I reached out to several Survivor historians about the same topic, 2 names kept popping up. And before I even did any of that, when I first drafted what the top 10 would look like, 2 names stood out above the rest. I just wasn't sure of the order. Feel free to pause the video right now and take a guess who they are if you're not sure. The top 2 most controversial Survivor winners are from season 19 Samoa, Natalie White, and from season 38, Edge of Extinction, Chris Underwood. And if you've seen those seasons and can recall the controversy over their wins, you would also know they're controversial for 2 very different reasons. Let's start with Natalie. Natalie's cut from the same cloth as Amber, and to a lesser extent Sandra and Michele. Few people at the time of her win were pro-Natalie or anti-Natalie. They barely had an opinion on the woman. It was difficult to do so when she only had 15 confessionals across 14 episodes. Who even was she? If you weren't paying attention, you would barely recognize her. Contrast that with Russell Hantz, who had 108 confessionals, the most overrated player to this day. When 14 million people watched Natalie trounce Russ in the finale, you can tell the crowd was not too pleased. Russ gives the audience the credit for believing in him. They cheer and support him live, unlike the jury, who did not feel the same way. Everyone was either pro or anti-Russell, similar to being pro or anti-Boston Rob. Natalie was basically a stand-in. But because of how overwhelming the season was portrayed through Russell's perspective, any average fan would see him as the self-proclaimed rightful winner. The editors basically did it for him, where Natalie didn't even speak until 4 hours into the season. Can you blame the average viewer for believing anything else? Especially at the time when winners like Natalie weren't so common? Remember all the winners before Samoa? Almost none of them were presented like Natalie was. Sure, you had Danny beating Stephanie, but Steph was portrayed quite negatively and not in a respectable way. You had Amber beating Rob, but we knew Amber then. She was a returning player, and when Rob proposed to her right before the winner reveal, it kind of made the controversy a little moot. Jenna definitely wasn't so likable, but Machete Matt wasn't Russell Hantz. What I'm trying to say is Natalie was profoundly unprecedented, to a degree never seen before and honestly never seen since. The backlash was strong. Websites were created to declare Russell was robbed. The fanbase didn't really understand how it happened. To this day, many fans still don't understand or care to understand, instead believing the jury got it wrong and that somehow being even slightly bitter is an excuse to explain why Russell wasn't flawed, and perhaps the game is flawed after all. Part of what makes Survivor so captivating is how it spurs such discussion over the subjective nature of what's required to win. It's incredibly complicated and changes all the time depending on the season, the year, the culture, the cast, the twists, how Probst is feeling. It's a major reason Survivor can exist for over 40 seasons and still hit number 1 in its time slot. Because on any given season, Russell can lose and Natalie can win, or Russell could win and Natalie could lose. And that's that. Natalie winning dramatically changed how the audience had to understand the game. And no matter how much airtime the flashiest player of the season gets, no matter how many idols or twists are introduced or put into the players' pockets, it doesn't change that Natalie can always be the winner on any given season.
I would say he took the bullets, hands down, and I would be the one behind, even though I was doing the same type thing. I was a lot more subtle.
You look visibly upset right now.
I played the best strategic game in history. Millions of people probably think that same thing, but you know, and
let's poll the jury and include Mick and Natalie on the jury now. And it's Jason and Shambo. Does Russell win the game? There's 4. Russell, you made the wrong choice. You had 4 votes, that would have been enough. Keep you up at night?
it sucks.
And since I mentioned twists, let's finally talk about Chris Underwood. You see, If I were to rank Natalie and Chris based on how much discussion these two winners would drum up over the span of 10 years or more, I think Natalie would take the cake and deserve to be number one on this list. People are going to be disputing Natalie's win until the end of days as far as I'm concerned, but then I consider that overwhelmingly 9 out of, say, 10 Survivor fans would say Chris probably should not have won his season at all. And I'm reminded that controversy is about public disagreement, disapproval. When season 38 wrapped up, barely anyone was jumping out of their seat, jumping for joy over Chris winning. I think it might have just been those seated in the front row of the reunion. But unlike Natalie, it wasn't necessarily because people were pro or anti-Chris, or really pro or anti-Gavin or Julie, or even Rick Devens. No. It was because those 9 out of 10 fans were anti-Edge of Extinction. The twist, where a sole survivor was crowned after not surviving, after having only played the game for 13 days, a third of this season. If we were to convert that number to the 26-day seasons, that's not even 9 days. It's basically winning Survivor in a week. You check out of work on a Friday, take 5 days of paid vacation, and come back the following Monday a millionaire. The controversy of Chris is more that he is the face of modern twists becoming increasingly frustrating to consider. Unlike Natalie or most other controversial winners, nobody disagrees much with Chris as a player. What we got in the finale was pretty stellar gameplay for the 5 days that he was there. The finale was a thrill ride. It was a season of Survivor in a single episode. And Chris made some gutsy moves that paid off. But the frustration across the audience was loud, and it was directed at Probst. Whereas Probst defended Natalie and Sandra against Russell and the fan base and demonstrated he understood the game 18 seasons prior at the Heroes vs. Villains reunion, in season 38, the game became so contorted that fans, or even Probst himself, couldn't recognize what it even was anymore. There were online campaigns with hashtags to cease the Edge twist from existing. The fan base was loud and upset. Nobody even really cared about Chris winning. They cared about the twist ever returning again, or what twist we would see next. I think the biggest difference between Chris's win and Natalie's win is that at the time of his win, and even since then, I can count on one hand the number of those who care to defend the Edge twist or even support him being a winner. Some fans support him taking full advantage of the tools in front of him, I would say the same, but they don't support any of these tools existing in the first place. It's overwhelmingly one-sided against him winning because of how he was able to win, not so much that he was the person or the player who won. Also, there were a lot of Rick Devens fans out there, and most of them were none too pleased with this outcome either. Because of the absurdity of a player winning in the manner that Chris did, I have to say his win is the most controversial in Survivor history. It was loud then, not much has changed today, and I would be shocked if it changed much going forward. Natalie's gonna land at number 2, but I do think there's a good argument to have her be number 1, just on a different level.
Third person voted out of Survivor. Chris, that's 4, that's enough. Need to bring me a torch. Chris, tribe's spoken.
Approximately 10 hours later.
The winner of Survivor, Edge of Extinction, Chris.
And after all is said and done, those are the top 10 most controversial Survivor winners. And wow, that was a lot. Let me know what you think. If you agree or disagree, let me know your top 5 in the comments. A big thank you to my patrons for uncontroversially supporting me each month. Thank you all for watching and making it this far. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to hydrate on your way out. This was a long one. I want to make sure you're still alive. And I will see you in the next one. Once I ask myself, am I out of touch? No, it's the jury who are wrong.
The right person win tonight. Only 31% said yes.
Did I do that?
Doesn't cost you anything. Would you do what the winner did to win? And almost half.
Got naked.
That's amazing. Walk around naked. if that's what was required.
Well, how am I the best if I don't beat the one they keep telling me about?
Well, come on, Russell. You're not the best, and it ain't gonna happen.
I am the best.
But you're good.
I can't come back with that because I didn't play you.
And you didn't win.